Hello and welcome everyone to our second virtual transportation forum. Really glad to have you all here today. My name is Michael Hintz. I'm Director of Planning for Tool Design in Seattle, and myself and Patrick Lynch are the co-liaisons for the Transportation Planning Division to the Washington APA chapter. So we're really excited that you're participating today. And I'm just going to hand it over to Patrick to introduce himself.
Hi, hi all. I'm Patrick Lynch with Transpo Group. We're a transportation planning and traffic engineering firm located in Kirkland, Washington. And yeah, this is our second virtual transportation forum. And so we're learning on how to conduct these things. So if there's a few technical difficulties along the way, please be patient with us.
Great. Well, today we have really excited to have a panel of transportation professionals throughout Washington State, representing diverse perspectives from the regional to the local, urban to rural. And I'm just going to have them introduce themselves real quick, and then Patrick and I have just a little introductory, kind of setting the stage, providing an overview of kind of transportation trends that we've seen during the pandemic and what we might anticipate after the pandemic. And no crystal balls here, but just a few ideas just to get the thoughts flowing and set the stage for our panelists. So before we launch into that, panelists, if you could just introduce yourselves.
Maybe start with Chris there in Bellevue.
There you go.
Great. Hi, I'm Chris Long. I am an interim traffic assistant director of traffic management for the City of Bellevue. I've been with Bellevue about 5 years. Prior to working at Bellevue, I worked as a traffic engineering consultant for DKS Associates in the Puget Sound area for about 20 years. So I'm an engineer by trade. So thanks for welcoming me into your planning group here.
Andrea, do you want to go?
Absolutely. Andrea Weckmueller-Behringer. I'm with the Walla Walla Valley MPO SRTPO. We bring the regional perspective to the table. I'm a geographer by trade, so big picture thinking, which works really well with planning. Walla Walla Valley is a bi-state agency. We take in Washington as well as Oregon territory, and we're in the business of facilitating both federal and state mandated metropolitan and regional transportation planning. We have a rather large study area straddling the Oregon and Washington state border. It encompasses 1,300 miles, most of which is rural, but we do have our urbanized area, which consists of Walla Walla, College Place, and Milton Freewater. And then we take in larger portions of Umatilla County and most of Walla Walla County. The entire region is home to about 70,000 people and 30,000 jobs, and we have a rather extensive transportation system. 312 miles of sidewalks, 144 miles of bike routes, 82 miles of transit routes, one regional airport with the SeaTac daily service, 154 miles of state routes, 1,200 miles of local roadways, and last but not least, 190 miles of railroad, both Class 1 and short line tracks, and 71 miles of navigable rivers. So as you can see, it really covers the entire gamut. We just finished our most recent long range transportation plan, adopted in February, so literally just a few days ago, where we documented goals, visions, and values, and the most recent need and resource assessments.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrea. And then Matt, why don't you go next?
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Herman. I'm a transportation planner for Clark County. Been with Clark County for about 7 years now. Clark County, back in 2007, completed the largest UGA expansion for the Vancouver urban growth area in state history. So we have a very large urban population that we plan for that is outside of this Vancouver city limits. For a perspective, Vancouver is the 4th largest city in the state. If the unincorporated portion of the Vancouver UJA were to incorporate, it would be the 5th largest city. So while we do plan for unincorporated Clark County, we are dealing with a pretty major suburban environment.
And then our last speaker, and I can't see if he's on, is Karl Audistrom from Spokane Transit Authority. And Karl, if you are on, please let us know.
Didn't see him join, Patrick.
Okay.
So hopefully he'll join us shortly before we launch into the discussion. I just wanted to say a few words about the Transportation Planning Division before we get going. As Patrick mentioned, this is our 2nd transportation forum. We hope to do these quarterly. First one was back in November, I believe, and we're really excited to see a pretty significant jump in the number of participants from that first one where we had, I don't know, under 20, and I think we've maxed out the registrants for this one at 100. So that's fantastic. I hope to keep these going, and we're always looking for fresh ideas on topics and panelists and all that good stuff. As the chapter liaisons, Patrick and I are really hoping to elevate the Transportation Planning Division in Washington State by more effectively using the division's network here. We have over 130 members in the state, and we want to engage them in discussions like this and also in actions that advance transportation planning in the state. So we're doing this through the virtual forums. We've started a transportation focus column in the Washington Planner newsletter, and we're always looking for ideas and writers for that column. And we are engaging directly with the Washington APA board and finding ways to be more active at the board level. And also we hope to do other informal things like just networking events and whatnot, which we did last fall in coordination with the Washington APA planning conference. We had a fun coffee break, which I got a lot of value from. So without further ado, just want to say one more time, we did open this one up to all APA members, not just TPD members. But we encourage you to become a TPD member if you're not already. We are thinking that in the future, these types of forums and other activities may be limited to just TPD members. So without further ado, Patrick and I wanted just to run through a few slides just to stoke the discussion a bit, and then we'll launch into the panel discussion. And of course, welcome any and all comments and questions from all of you. Take it away, Patrick.
Okay, well, so we have a couple of slides here, and we're going to go through these pretty quick. We want to get to the panel discussion, but this is just intended to kind of prime the pump for the discussion and maybe pose some questions along the way. So we'll get right through these. Let's see here. Okay, so, as we've all been experiencing, there's been this kind of short-term disruption to our transportation system due to the stay-at-home orders with COVID. But really, I think as planners, we're really focused on, how will this kind of the things that we're experiencing now translate into kind of future trends. Some of these things were already occurring pre-COVID. And so this, the stay-at-home orders have either, accelerated these trends or maybe have changed direction in some ways of what was happening before. So as we look ahead, we want to see what was happening pre-COVID. And, there was a lot of growth in a lot of these different modes. Air travel was up, road vehicle miles traveled on our roadways was increasing, maybe at a more modest pace. Transit nationally was actually declining. Here in the Puget Sound region, it was actually increasing. So we were one of the few bright spots for transit ridership. T&C growth, the shared use mobility was obviously growing. Micro mobility as a whole was growing, e-scooters and things of that nature. This kind of first and last mile sort of transportation was growing. It was more, you know, there's different stories in different markets, but overall it was growing as a mode. And then just freight and goods movement was increasing. And so, so then the pandemic hits. And one of the things that happened with that was the dramatic increase in telework. So this chart shows kind of what was happening. We were, you know, under 10% of, 10% of work was done through telework. That jumped up to above 60%. And then, you know, during the months of the stay-at-home orders, it was kind of slowly coming down. But the question there is in that last piece is really, where does it end up? And there's some good research that's been done during the pandemic about what's likely to happen with telework. But there's things that are happening relative to changes in policies at a corporate level as our employers are adopting telework as a legitimate way of working. There's increases in efficiencies of the technology that allows for this in terms of sharing information, just the video conferencing, the accessibility of this technology. And that's only going to increase in the future and maybe even accelerate. And so there's things are going to very much in terms of telework are going to, that new baseline is going to be much higher than where we started. One of the other things that was part of University of Chicago study that was kind of looking at telework trends, they did a survey about post-vaccine, what would people's behavior be? And so, as part of their questioning, they were looking at, would there be a complete return to pre-COVID activities, or would there be a more cautious approach to that? And so, what the survey showed is about a third of the respondents were going to be much more cautious about returning to normal activities. So I think this return to normalcy is going to be a slower return to normalcy. And so that's another reason why some of these kind of virtual interactions we've been experiencing are likely to carry on much longer than maybe first thought post-vaccine. Another thing that was kind of growing at a pretty steady pace pre-pandemic was e-commerce. That, similar to telework, had a dramatic increase as we all needed to acquire, the things that we need in our daily lives through, these virtual online sellers. And there's good evidence that similar to telework is likely to stick, at least in higher percentages. So what this chart is showing is sort of a month over month, or it kind of, going through kind of the years and quarterly looking at jumps. And so these little spikes are more like the seasonal peaks of e-commerce, but you can see this large kind of peak here at the end of 2020. It's come down a little bit since the peak of the stay-at-home orders, but really the question is, where does that end up? And how does that affect our transportation system? I'll just kind of jump through that one. Transit and shared use mobility. I mean, maybe nothing was impacted as much as transit ridership. And this chart here is a chart that King County Metro publishes monthly, and it's basically it represents the percent and change of average weekly boardings, and you can see that once the things here in the central Puget Sound region, like transit ridership had a pretty steady increase. once the pandemic hit, there was this steep drop off, and then we've kind of seen this little gradual climb and kind of the ridership sort of plateauing a little bit. And so that's really the question, I think, is what happens to all of those choice riders that left the system, and when will they return, and how long will it take for it to return? And will it kind of return to where it was pre-pandemic? And those are all the questions I think we're waiting to see. And then these next set of slides are for Michael here.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So Patrick just talked about some of the trends we're seeing in trip generation, trip demand. I just wanted to touch on some of the things that we've seen in the right-of-way itself, and how cities and localities have reimagined their right-of-ways during the pandemic, and how this might project into a post-pandemic world. So I think we've probably seen a lot of this kind of thing in our communities, repurposing right-of-way to accommodate businesses and outdoor dining. Also, next slide, Patrick. Just creating more spaces for people to safely walk and bike and be healthy, while also socially distant. And I know cities like City of Seattle are looking to make a lot of those safe and healthy streets permanent. So that's a positive trend. Experimenting with repurposing the right-of-way. This is downtown Pullman. Experimenting with a protected bike lane and lane reduction in our main street downtown. We've had some great guidance come out from NACTO, from King County Public Health, just helping localities think through how they go about repurposing, reallocating their right-of-way and accommodating businesses and other activities in the right-of-way. There's been a lot of discussion around equity. I think it's really daylighted a lot of issues around equity and how our transportation systems are and are not serving certain populations. This is an extreme example from San Francisco, but the idea of really allocating our right-of-way in a more equitable way has really gained traction, and I think we'll continue to see that in a post-pandemic world, hopefully. And then just this idea of being more flexible with our infrastructure and our streets, using technology to better manage our right-of-way through ITS and parking strategies, using low-cost solutions to quickly build safety infrastructure and other infrastructure, and also just allowing for things that occur in our right-of-way that just contribute to community vitality and economic resiliency. I think this idea, we're certainly in Washington State focused on concentrating development in urban centers, and this idea of 15-minute neighborhoods, 20-minute neighborhoods, choose your number. But proximity it's been an important planning concept before the pandemic, and I think with these shifts in where people are choosing to work and choose to locate, it will continue to be a really important focus of our planning efforts. So that is just a few slides just to get the pump primed, as Patrick suggested, and we wanted to kind of launch into our panel discussion now. And we have a few questions for our panelists, and just ask them to chime in on this first one. And if there are other questions that people have, follow-up questions, or even unrelated questions to what we're asking, please type them in the chat, and we'll be sure to ask those of the panelists.
Michael, Karl has joined us, so maybe let's have Karl introduce himself. Welcome, Karl.
Yeah, my apologies for being late. I'm Karl Otterstrom, the Director of Planning and Development at Spokane Transit. I've been here 12 years and Washington State native, and before Spokane Transit, I was with King County Metro.
Thanks for joining us, Karl. Great to have you.
Excellent.
Then, Michael, there was a few people waiting in the waiting room. I don't know, are they all in now?
Yeah, I just admitted
Okay.
them. I think keeping an eye on that, but
Yeah.
thanks for
Okay.
pointing that out. Great. Well, our first question for our esteemed panelist is just focused around how has the pandemic changed your agency's priorities and how it does business. And why don't we'll go in the same order that we went in with the intros. Chris, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so certainly when the pandemic first hit, our top priority was figuring out how to keep our capital projects moving and doing that safely. So we were very successful in that, and we're actually able to take advantage of the reduced traffic volumes to get caught up on some projects that had slipped, or projects like our overlay program that we had been behind on for a couple of years in not being able to finish it every year because of just the timing of the work and how busy all the contractors were. As that sort of settled in, the focus is then sort of shifted into looking internally and working on our organizational health, and that was a lot of that was around workload balance across departments because of some of the impacts that COVID had on our budget, and in trying to figure out what are the top priority projects that we needed to keep moving forward. And then also working on continuing to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work and in our hiring at the City of Bellevue. And the last point I was going to make is as our budget got adopted for this current biennium, we really saw our council push for more of our projects that were focused on multimodal access into our business centers. And so we've seen a great support of some transit work that we're looking to do in Bellevue, a better connection into Bellevue College. We have an initiative we call our Urban Core Bicycle Rapid Implementation. And so we're working on trying to roll out even more bike infrastructure connecting into our major urban development areas. And then we are developing a multimodal concurrency model, and that is taken off quickly and will hopefully be done by the end of the year.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Chris. A lot of stuff happening there, City of Bellevue, it sounds like. Andrea.
Regional perspective is, of course, somewhat different since we do not actually put any projects on the ground. Agency business, that transition and pandemic effects, it looked really easy at first. We made that transition from in-person to virtual meetings without hiccups. We had no hardware issues or bandwidth concerns, and we didn't have any of the subsequent Zoom bombs. But what we've noticed relatively quickly that some of our small entity members had some difficulties to deal with. So they had the hardware issues and they had the internet limitations. What was even worse is that members of the public are often unfamiliar with these tools, particularly when this first started. And it was most disastrous for those members of the public who have visual or hearing disabilities, which makes navigating these virtual meetings entirely difficult to the point of almost useless. Reopening now, we're a two-person agency. I'm not really going for the reopening because we have such space limitations. We could only bring 30% of our board members and committee members back into the room, and everything else would have to be virtual and in-person hybrid. As you can imagine, this is all very time-consuming and costly. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Everybody else is having those same difficulties. In terms of agency priorities, our priorities were actually not affected since a lot of what we do is already prescribed by federal and state law. None of our deadlines were affected, which is good and bad because we knew exactly what we needed to do. We just had to do it so differently. And of course, everything took so much more time And I can tell you that our member entities were so busy with their own COVID activities that sometimes they didn't have time to really play with us. What really came to the forefront is, of course, the struggle with the equitable outreach. As I said before, Zoom and Teams meeting environments are entirely unfriendly to those who have visual and hearing impairments, but it's also really difficult to draw in our large Latino population who have a clear preference for in-person meetings. So again, work activities remained relatively unaffected. How we were doing things and who we were reaching out to, that was seriously affected, and those equity concerns linger, and we're working to address those, because even though with as much as the platforms have evolved over the past year, there are still some shortcomings in terms of equitable outreach. In all of this, there has been a silver lining in the pandemic for us. We've already had an increased focus on community health and individual health related to walkability. That was a shift the agency had started several years ago. And so with the pandemic and the increased activity, walking and biking, and then some of the open streets modifications that our member entities had made, that walkability initiative really received some energy that didn't just come from the MPO, it also came from all of our member entities. And that I have to thank the pandemic for, because otherwise I don't think we would have made such a big jump in this.
Great, thank you.
As far as Clark County has gone, I can start with our financial assessment. We really didn't have any issues with financing our capital programs. As a county, we collect a lot of our revenue through our road fund, which is paid by property taxes. So we don't rely on gas taxes as much as other local jurisdictions. It's mostly financed through road funds, and those road funds are used as leverage for state and federal grants. So we didn't really see a huge drop off with our capital projects. With Clark County, we are obviously heavily influenced by Portland and Portland metro region. And we've had issues in the past with implementing active transportation modes. A lot of our constituents are very reluctant to implement strategies that are done in Portland in Clark County. And it's been a struggle to get a multimodal system and incorporate Clark County. So as this pandemic hit, we kind of borrowed a phrase from Rahm Emanuel, and we didn't let the crisis go to waste. So in 2020, we made several changes because we saw the shift in our travel modes. Our vehicle volumes, for most part, went down by 60% early on in the pandemic phase months, and then have kind of rose back to normal. But we have implemented several actions, including requirement for pedestrian access ways. So when development moves forward and they are within where they abut a collector or arterial but do not connect to it, they are required to build a pedestrian access way with reduced setbacks that on the fronts that are abut that access way. So we're really trying to promote that walkability and that connection between neighborhoods and future transit locations. Obviously, we've found that transit comes after residential development, not before. So we need to put that infrastructure in place before that transit is there. Another thing, we have converted a lot of our collectors from collectors with parking to collectors with bike lanes. Our council was a bit reluctant to do this, but when we explained how the roadway surface is less with bike lanes than with parking, and the reduced costs that go along with that. We showed them the financial incentive to do that. Moving into the future, DEI is definitely on our perspective. We are recognizing that diversity, equity, and inclusion analysis by us, by the county, by staff is insensitive, and it needs to be done by an outside perspective. By saying that our plans meet our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, we're not doing the public justice by actually having a good lens on what we're doing and how we're trying to promote disenfranchised communities. So we're moving forward with a good implementation and starting with goals to set for our plans and projects as they move forward to meet those objectives. We're also moving forward with establishing roundabout corridor classification. In many instances, roundabouts have been implemented as an intersection treatment, but we're starting to think about that more as a corridor and a street classification. So how access management is associated with roundabouts as compared to regular intersections, and how median and channelization policies are implemented on a corridor that is has roundabouts rather than intersections.
Oh, I took it off.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
And then Karl, I mean, how's that affecting transit?
Well, as you shared, transit has been significantly impacted. I think I'd say I'd put air transportation above transit as the most negatively impacted in terms of their volumes of passengers. We saw our worst time back in April or so in terms of ridership drop off about 70%. We're around minus 50% right now compared to a year ago. And we improved in the late summer, early fall before the renewed phase one we all went into in November. But the business practice is obviously lots of things, cleaning, how we address cleaning during the day and during the night on the buses and vehicles, face masks, work from home, all those things. As I have maybe worked from home 9 or 10 days out of this whole pandemic. I started wearing a mask about a month before anybody told me I had to wear it riding the bus, and never had any issues. And so I've been riding the bus, doing all those things, demonstrating the value, at least to everybody here, that we do provide not only an essential service, but a safe service in light of the pandemic. And the data that's come out over time has really demonstrated that that's a fact, that wearing masks and on transit is works quite well in a pandemic. Obviously, perception is not there, as Patrick shared earlier. Where we see kind of the response coming back right now is in our ParaTransit. Actually, we expected ParaTransit to have the largest negative impact. Those are people with disabilities and elderly customers who can't use a regular bus because of an age or disability, and that has actually come back stronger than we expected. We're right around about the same, about negative 55%, but we thought that would be the longer one to rebound. And really, since the vaccines have started being received and all that's where we're seeing those people feel more confident to get out and in the community, and their different programs that they use are starting to restart. So that's been very interesting. As part of our agency priorities, and we've been very busy, obviously addressing all these various phases of service reduction, mostly addressing the anticipated decline in drivers that are available. We saw some of that, but really nothing like a lot of the other transit agencies saw on the west side with large number of employees who are either uncomfortable or are unavailable for work because of sickness. But we cut some of our service related to the universities, and that's still basically suspended until they come back online. But generally, I'd say we're in really one of the best positions a transit agency could be in at this point. Financially, we went into it in a strong position, and our projects, we got lots of projects going on, things that become easier to do because of the pandemic. Obviously, lots of figuring that out, and also addressing. Financially, we went through a process, a public consultation process, to slow down some of our commitments in our outer years with the expectations that the financial negative impact that we would see a recessionary effect from the pandemic, and certainly certain sectors of the economy here in Spokane are suffering, and they're in the hospitality and restaurant, food services. However, as a region, we've shot up on the top. I guess I saw yesterday that the index to our size, fifth most inbound community across the country. Housing prices have increased like 20% in a year, and I was looking at this morning. It's mind-boggling and problematic, I think. And so when we think about the next few years, we have a growth challenge in our community. We have a plan. We're just addressing elements of that plan, but we're quickly trying to append that plan. Other projects were viewed as longer out opportunities. So we're finishing a first phase of a BRT pre-planning study that we intend to bring into preliminary engineering here very shortly on Division Street, for those who are familiar with the area. And we have to start thinking about what comes after that, how we electrify, and the recognition that the region's growing, population's growing, and affordability is going to be tight. So some of our areas that we have strong ridership today, they may gentrify, and those people are displaced into areas that are farther out. And so access across the region, not just to the tried and true neighborhoods where we have solid 15-minute frequency, and we expect those corridors to sustain and grow with infill, but our riders who, and those essential jobs and services where new businesses and areas are growing, we've got to figure out how to serve those in pretty short order. So it's a very interesting dynamic where, as an industry, we feel like this is really, it is our worst ridership year in since 1970, 1969 or something crazy like that. And yet we are busier than ever, and feel at least momentarily secure in our jobs. 10 years out, transportation's changing, but at the same time, the corridors and the density of Spokane is going to need transit.
Karl, I had one, there's a person who submitted a question ahead of time, and it kind of relates to what you were saying in your opening remarks, just about people's confidence getting back on transit. And the question was having to do with, have there been any conversations around a coordinated PR marketing campaign to get people to return to public transit? It would be great to see something coming from the federal level or state level. Are you aware of any?
I am not. I know a lot of the focus has been federal, is getting people to wear their masks. Now it is a federal mandate on transit through our grant obligations. We've been tracking for 3 months or so compliance. We have about 0.5% who say that they have a medical exemption of our riders. So it's very, very low, the number of people who are refusing to wear a mask for whatever reason, whether it's contrived or real, in terms of their exemption. As far as our current PR has been, outside of announcing projects and whatnot, has been around being an essential service and really helping people recognize the value of what we bring to the community to help people who work at the hospitals, who work at Amazon Fulfillment Center, the industrial jobs, whatnot, that are taking transit. I certainly have lobbied internally to start thinking about that, especially as our high schools start back online, in class sessions in a week or so, and then the universities start gearing up for next year, because those riders, you know, if we can get a freshman at the university on the bus the first year, they're really in a good position for the rest of their lives to be favorable towards riding transit for work. And so we are working with the city of Spokane on, we did this last year very successfully. Sorry, 2019, last year's all blur. 2019, we had a wonderful summer youth card where the students, all the basically the 12 and up, I think, had a free bus pass issued by the city of Spokane. The city of Spokane paid for that bus pass for the summer. The city has budgeted for that program this summer, and I think it's a great way to start getting people back on, and this is safe and partnering that way. But at the national level, I haven't heard of anything yet.
Great, thank you. There was a question from a participant related to the idea of, as Matt paraphrased Rahm Emanuel, not letting this crisis go to waste. Questions around large employers that would like to use a transition back to in-person activities as a behavior change opportunity. However, this participant is encountering an increased sense of liability and responsibility for employee safety as employers pick and choose what and how they're going to encourage or incentivize in terms of transportation modes over others. Do any of the panelists have thoughts, comments, experience on this heightened sense of accountability for employee health as we continue efforts to address old goals in this new environment?
That's a really interesting concern. I haven't heard that one raised before. I know we have a very large employer that's gradually moving into downtown Bellevue that has their own bike share incentive program where they provide bikes to their employees and are using different tools to incentivize alternate modes of travel and into their workplace. So it's and then in other of the large employers have been great advocates for bike network improvements in our city. So that's where we're seeing a lot of the benefits and support from our council coming from, is hearing from these businesses as well. So not seeing the reverse issue of the sense of ownership of that and liability, I suppose.
So we administer the CTR program for the large employers in Clark County, and we also partner with City of Vancouver. I know the City of Vancouver is seeing a huge amount of downtown redevelopment happening. And this continues to, regardless of the pandemic, we are still having office buildings being built row after row. And it seems like there's still that desire to relocate downtown and eventually have an office building that you commute to. Even with us, as Clark County as an employer has said, you might not be returning to work, you might not have an office, you might still be at home, but we are still seeing the office development happening in downtown Vancouver.
Another great question here actually was a suggestion for a future panel discussion, but I think we could discuss it a bit here and now. This one is about reclaiming sidewalks and parking lots post-pandemic. participants interested in learning if cities and counties in Washington would consider in a post-COVID-19 world permanent allowances for drinking and dining outside in spaces formerly reserved, designated for vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. Seems like the new normal working nationwide, especially during the warmer months of the year. I know I'm familiar with some communities that have really streamlined their permit processes for outdoor dining and are looking to make that process permanent, just to encourage those kinds of activities. Just curious if any of your agencies are looking at similar things and kind of allowing these right away reprogramming things to carry on in the future. I guess
I would say in Bellevue we have an area of Bellevue called it's Old Bellevue. Basically, a lot of right next to the high-rise section of Bellevue, we have a lot of older local businesses with lots of restaurants, and we had a fairly successful outdoor dining program that used on-street parking. And the local businesses are really excited to do it again. And there's not a lot of parking in that part of town, but the downtown, the population of downtown residents has grown so much that they're starting to see the benefit of just creating more space for the patrons and less concerned about the space for the parking. So we are continuing that. We're also looking at pivoting some of the what we called healthy streets, where we, similar to what Seattle and other larger cities had done for creating space to walk in a socially distanced manner, we're looking at converting at least one of them into a neighborhood greenway and focus more on bicycle access through that area. And then we've also done more food pickup zones in our downtown, and we're finding that is still a really valued proposition to the restaurants, and trying to figure out how to create a way to incorporate that more permanently as well.
Thanks, Chris.
About what our member entities have done. Quite a bit went into what street could be closed to help the businesses and what streets couldn't be closed. And I know that the city, in coordination with the Downtown Foundation, so they got direct feedback from the business owners when Main Street was completely locked down and only open to bicycles and pedestrians. The business owners actually saw less foot traffic versus one particular section was and remains completely closed off for outdoor dining, which helped all of the nearby restaurants. So it was literally a corridor and street by block approach to find out what treatment and what kind of vehicle restriction would be the most conducive to getting people back out and to helping the downtown businesses. So it was, I think we've arrived at a good spot where we do have more space for people walking and biking. It was not at the detriment of parking spots, and it was not at the detriment of those who want to continue to drive to the businesses.
I think that's an important issue. I know, in the past, we've talked about the battle for curb space, and I think the pandemic has kind of put that topic at the forefront of our conversation. Not only are we dealing with the TMCs and the drop-off locations and now the food delivery services, that outdoor space has also been a place for restaurants too. So it's really an important policy discussion for our electeds to have, as far as whether mobility and safety of that street is more important than the economic development that's associated with it. So it's going to be an important discussion, and it's going to be necessary to have.
I had a question. It's kind of a broader question about how, moving forward, how long-range planning might change for different communities. As we're experiencing these changes, as kind of the slide deck was kind of showing, that a lot of these things are going to remain long into the future. And so if a question, I guess, is, have any of you had these discussions internally about, especially here in the Central Puget Sound region, we'll be going through our next round of comp plan updates here, beginning these very shortly, and they're due 2024, but a lot of them start a couple of years ahead of time. Have you had discussions, and what are things that you plan on doing differently this next round?
Can I kick it off? Oh my gosh, the pandemic has disrupted the entire playbook of transportation planning. In all of these decades of transportation planning that I have under my belt, I've never seen anything like it. So just because you thought you knew transportation planning, the pandemic has turned everything upside down, and there is no continuity from historical trends whatsoever. In the past, we've always watched the data, and we could see things nudge up this way or nudge down that way, and kind of infer what would happen within the next 4 to 5 years, and then maybe look into the crystal ball and say, yeah, in 25 years, we think it's going to look this way. And luckily, we do update our long-range transportation plan every 4 to 5 years. Now, the changes are so dramatic. I mean, even just, and I took a quick peek at my Strava Metro data. From 2019 to 2020, the amount of walk trips has essentially, 60% more walk trips. It's phenomenal to have such a large increase. What do you do with this when you don't know if this is sustained or if this will bounce back to, a little bit above pre-COVID levels? So we really have to go back and totally reevaluate any kind of trend analysis we had before, because it's so unlike anything else. I mean, I know we talked about it previously, where the working from home levels are going to fall after all the vaccinations hit and everything returns to, normal. We don't know. We honestly don't know. And what is particularly difficult, especially for small rural areas, is some of the data that is currently collected in larger metropolitan areas or even nationwide does not necessarily translate well into rural communities. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one in this situation, but as a small agency, we don't have the funds or the time to launch large-scale quantifiable data collection efforts to really get to the root of this, so we can make some more informed trend assumptions for the future. So I see this as a continuing problem for several years, because we are totally out of equilibrium. This is not like anything we've ever done before.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pandemic has exposed the cracks in transportation planning for us. I think we have focused a lot on future planning as far as technology base and our adaptation of our signals and how we're going to bring on automated vehicles. And I think the name of the game in the future is going to be the adaptability of our transportation system and how we can, as humans, we're able to adapt, but our infrastructure has a lot slower time doing it. I think that's the future.
Great.
Chris, maybe, yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Well, I was just going to say that we have about 4 minutes left. I didn't see any more questions in the chat. Did you have a final question or thought, Patrick?
I don't have a final question, but I was gonna see if Karl or Chris had a quick take on that last question, if there was something they just wanted to kind of quickly finish on.
I'll just say, being more the operations guy at the city, I'm less plugged into comp plan updates, but I do know that we're trying to get our CTR companies to be thinking outside the box a little more in their in how they operate and do their incentives for employees, and really seeing how telework is going to change our commute patterns, and things like eliminating monthly parking, so that you're paying by the day, and so that you're knowing that you're not going to be coming in every day. So in using that to incentivize use of other modes. So and of course there's companies out there that can help support that type of function for a large company too. So trying to create those partnerships so that we can see this maybe stick a little longer, not knowing how long the telework is going to be something that folks find as a way to manage their daily business. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, like I said, just the growth trajectory of Spokane right now. But as we're updating our comprehensive plan, which is agency specific, mostly our policies and principles and practices related to the services we provide and how we engage the public. And so that effort, we're really seeking to retool a lot of our policies to be more adaptive and reflective of where we are. But we have a study coming up to look at a mobility hub concept, really trying to integrate the idea that we have trunk lines and we have a park and ride at the end, but a park and ride as we've known to be may not be what the future is. Maybe the parking prices downtown really draw that market. The people who have cars are less interested in that or parking it there. They need some other features to draw them into the transit center, so they don't have a car to begin with. It would be the more effective way to get them on the bus. But so thinking about a mobility hub and how we some type of autonomous vehicles to scooters, other things that could be used to draw people to that transit station, and so just rethinking it's rethinking the business in a lot of different ways, while at the same time those trunk lines are going to be key. The tried and true solution of frequency, reliability, speed are still going to be important in the corridors where the density supports it, or the overall travel patterns do. But how does public transportation redefine itself in the new modalities of the future is kind of an ongoing to be continued story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think all this is TBD, right? And really appreciate all of your insights from your respective agencies. And I know, Chris, you have a hard stop here, so we'll say goodbye to you, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks everyone else. Thank you, Matt, Andrea, and Karl for agreeing to be our panel today. I hope this was valuable to those of you who tuned in, and we look forward to future forums like this. And I put Patrick and I's email in the chat. If you have any thoughts on future forums or how Transportation Planning Division can add value to your work, please get in touch with us, and we'd love to work with you on that. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.